it's just about doing one thing well and being very clean, because you don't want a lot of PR pollution out there in the world that people are going to stumble upon and be like, why is there one article on this Medium page? That's so weird. It's just messy.
Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work.
We are excited to sit down with Charlotte Japp, head of platform at ffVC, a seed-stage fund investing in fintech, AI, B2B SaaS, and autonomy. Charlotte began her career in creative marketing at Vice and Live Nation as a copywriter and art director. In 2018, she launched Cirkel, a platform connecting older and younger professionals for two-way career support, which introduced her to the VC ecosystem. In January 2022, she joined ffVC. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura and Will.
So let's start off when you were working at Vice and Live Nation as a copywriter, art director, and producer. Can you touch on that experience?
Yeah, so I was really creative in college. I really wanted to go into a creative field. So at Georgetown, I was on the radio station. I was on the art club. I did a lot of internships during college in publications like Interview Magazine, and really thought I wanted to go the media path. So when I graduated, I got this dream job at Vice Media in Brooklyn. And for 5 years, the first 5 years of my career, I focused on basically the business development side of the media company, but doing it through the creative lens. So we would get these briefs from advertisers that wanted to go a little deeper than your average banner ad, and wanted to do events, branded content together, really anything, social media campaigns. And so I was on this creative team where we came up with those concepts based off of those briefs and their brand goals, and basically figured out strategic ways to put that brand in front of the Vice audience. And then I went on to Live Nation, which owns Ticketmaster and a lot of the big music festivals in the US and around the world, and did the same thing, but through the lens of music festivals and experiences that could happen on behalf of a brand at Bonnaroo, for example. So that was super fun. And it was a nice melding of strategic business thinking. What does this brand want to achieve in front of this audience? And then creative thinking, how do we make it interesting and relevant and stand out? And then I actually got to go and execute it. So it was a lot of fun, strategy plus getting my hands dirty and making things happen.
And that creative itch turned into an entrepreneurial bug as you founded Cirkel. And so that was your next stint after media. How did Cirkel come about and then lead you to ffVC?
Yeah, so I started Cirkel. I really wasn't going out and trying to start a startup. It was sort of accidental and was driven by a painful pain point, which was seeing that my parents really struggled with their careers after the age of 50. Both of them got aged out of corporate jobs around that time, and both of them made the transition into entrepreneurship and started their own consulting businesses. When I was seeing that happen, I was also in the early stages of my own career, and I was actually living at home because I grew up here in New York, paying back my student loans for 4 years as I was living with them. And I just saw all of those frustrations up close. All of a sudden, they go from being one role in a large company to being one role that does everything. And so they were figuring out social media and these kind of new tools that were popping up. And I was learning how to deal with office politics and working in my first job. Our two-way exchange of career support and mentoring inspired me to start Cirkel. That was in 2018, which is also when I started working at Live Nation. I was moonlighting nights and weekends, just trying to create what was first just an event series to network between generations, and then eventually turned into a paid community model. And I went full time on it in 2020 during the pandemic.
And then that introduced you to ffVC, I'm assuming via fundraising?
Yeah, the fundraising process was my introduction to venture capital as a thing. Honestly, living in New York and working in media, it was pretty easy to avoid the VC scene. It was just its own bubble, and I wasn't part of it. I started to meet these incredible investors who were people that became my friends that are smart, cool women. They had a lot of similar ways of thinking and that scrappiness of let me go and meet people and get things done and have big ideas. I actually had a friend from Georgetown who is a couple years older than me and had made the move from working in marketing and doing a lot of branded events, just like I did. And then she went and co founded a startup, just like I did. And then she went and became head of platform at Human Ventures. And when she made that move, I was like, whoa, wait, what is that? That sounds really cool. And the more she told me about it, the more I was like, this is the job for me. It's the perfect blend of community building, marketing, founder execution, founder support, all the stuff that I kind of went through. I was really excited and I applied to a few VCs and it worked out with ffVC and I started in January 2022.
Thanks for the overview of the platform role. Specifically, can you drill down into your roles and responsibilities as the head of platform?
Yeah, the way I think of it, it's split between internal and external. So on the external side, it's marketing and thinking and building around how ffVC is positioned in the tech ecosystem. That includes things like our newsletter, the Gives Asks News newsletter that goes out to 30,000 people every 2 weeks. It's also our social media, it's our events that are open to the public, other investors, founders. And then there's the internal piece, which is focusing on our portfolio. And the way I see it, you make an investment in a company. How do you de-risk the investment and put thought and effort and strategy work and resources into making sure your companies actually grow and eventually give you returns? Introducing them to other VCs for follow-on funding. It's introducing them to big corporates who can become customers. It's introducing them to advisors or experts that can help them figure out business problems or giving them discounts to tech tools and service providers. It's very problem solving. It's what is your problem as a founder and how can I help fix it?
I think it'd be helpful if you could just give a little context to the investment strategy at ffVC quickly.
Yeah, I'm working on a deck right now about our strategy. So this is very top of mind. Platform used to be something that was a real differentiator for a VC. It was a superpower, a secret sauce. As the role has grown and proven its value, it's now become table stakes. That's a good thing and also a bad thing because it means that there's more pressure on a VC to have a more sophisticated platform offering. And you'll see, I think this is something you sort of talked about in the outline we looked at together, but as a firm gets bigger, they get more LPs and institutions to invest, the AUM goes up, there's more money to be spent on management costs, you start to see much larger platform teams. So I'm currently a team of one. I'm in the process of hiring my first report, who will be based out of Warsaw. And we're about between 10 and 15 total. I think we're more like 14. So that's like basically a 2 to 14 ratio. And then you have Insight, I think it's 140 investors to 120 platform people. Very different. And so if you're looking at scale that looks like that, it means each platform person is that much more specialized in what they support founders with. So you might have someone who only does social media marketing. And whenever a portfolio company, whether it's like maybe at the pre-seed or Series D or something and they want some help in that field, I'm sure it's much more interesting things. I'm just spitballing. That person would basically be called upon to get into the weeds and play doctor and really fix things. Whereas I do like so many different things that it's really hard for me to specialize because I would be missing balls that are up in the air. So that's really where things start to change.
And you've mentioned hiring. Maybe what are two or three other core ways that you feel a VC can add value?
This year has taught us that even financial expertise. The fact that our partners are not former founders, but rather finance experts has come really in handy during the SVB collapse. Cash management never used to be like a sexy thing to talk about. It became just like a really important topic this year. As so many founders, they're building their businesses. They're not thinking about, do I put my money that I've just raised into a money market fund, or how many bank accounts should I have? And we were very proactive in messaging instructions day by day as that was happening during the collapse of SVB and all the subsequent pieces that were falling. Even just like the internal communication stream, where I was working that whole weekend, as a lot of us were, and just connecting the founding partners at ffVC, getting all of their amazing insights, and then making sure it was translated in a really simple and actionable way so that the portfolio could actually start to move money and make sure that they weren't going out of business because their money was at SVB, for example. So that taught me a lot about like crisis communications, which was not something I thought I would need to leverage coming into ffVC or into VC in general. But there are other ways. Introductions have become this really important piece of what it means to be a VC in general, with platform, not only getting a really rich network, but being able to create a system where before I came to ffVC, there was no database where all of our network contacts existed. The fact that John knows all these people at Tiger and Alex knows all these people at Greycroft, we weren't able to tell founders where we were connected because it just wasn't consolidated. So that was one of my first projects. And now we have a system for if you're fundraising, first you reach out to Connor, you send us your target list, we get you a pitch coach, we go through the pitch, we get that perfected, then we start sending out our blurbs to get these intros going, and we actually have like a system in place so that we're raising money for like millions of dollars for our portfolio companies.
It sounds like you implemented a lot of structure, which is awesome. And when I think about like KPIs on the investor side, I think about sourcing, whether it's quality deal flow, deals that you've diligenced, or portfolio support, how you're adding value to your portfolio companies. So I'm curious, like in the platform position, what are the different metrics that you use to track success?
And this is definitely changing over time. This year has been pretty important in starting to create some metrics. One thing that we've started doing is creating a Kanban style task sheet. So every time a portfolio company raises their hand, proverbially, to get some help with something, whether it's fundraising, hiring, getting an advisor, intro, we as a team, me and all the investors, start to pull those tasks into Airtable, and we actually track the process of that task getting finished. So by the end of the year, we want to look at all the tasks we've completed, what number, this is the first year we're doing it, so I don't have a sense yet of what we should be tracking for next year and going bigger and bigger every year. But how many of these tasks are we getting through successfully? Which ones are falling through the cracks and we're not doing successfully, and why? And then even being able to categorize the type of tasks that we're seeing and the ones we're doing well versus not well. Another system that I'm working on is actually tracking all of our intros. So how many intros are we making for our portfolio companies each quarter and year? And how do we categorize them? Is it intros for fundraising, intros for customer introductions, intros for getting discounts to a service provider? So that's a big one. And then for me, I do a survey every year to track NPS, Net Promoter Score, and trying to get a sense of how many people are taking the survey, the engagement. So if I'm saying, hey, we're trying to do some quality check here, please take this annual survey. It's basically the only survey I ask them to do all year. How many people are out of the portfolio are taking it? And what is that NPS score? And is it going up over time? Those are some of the harder numbers that I'm starting to track. And then you could go deeper. Events, we have an annual general meeting every year, as most funds do. We're asking all of our portfolio companies to attend, but how many are actually showing up, which will include for many of them buying a plane ticket and really making that commitment. How many showing up? Who are they bringing? Is that number of engagement going up over time since we have that same event year on year? Just things like that to see, is what we're doing sticking so that people are leaning in, Or is there something that's like not resonating and then they're leaning out and not engaging with us?
And you've mentioned a few different ways in which you guys have added value. And obviously you have, 90 plus portfolio companies, and it's just you leading the platform team right now. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you're able to prioritize different tasks across the portfolio. Obviously, there are multiple ways you can add value to all 90 companies, but certainly you don't have time to do that. So how are you able to prioritize it across the different asks?
Some funds will have a system where they sort of triage their companies, which is a little like faux pas to say out loud. But if you've made a huge investment into a company and they have all the ingredients, but something's not working, you might want to prioritize that company. We have such a diverse portfolio from pre-seed to pre-IPO because of that 15 years that we've been in market. So the earlier stage companies need us more, and they're kind of a lower hanging fruit in that they reach out to us. If we make a suggestion, they'll take it and take action on it pretty quickly. That has been something that's sort of guided me like, okay, I want to make sure that we're graduating enough companies through to Series B, which is one of our big things is survivorship. Our companies survive more than the average fund. So how do we make sure that they're getting there? And then in terms of tasks to prioritize, included a couple questions in the survey that I just mentioned about what are the biggest things that you need help with this year. And in the beginning, I think I sent that out in February. And so the market was already in a downturn. It was, let's get down to brass tacks. What do you actually need the most help with? And then we also asked the question, what do you perceive ffVC as being most helpful to you with? And so we wanted to look at what the actual needs are versus what we appear to be helping with. Luckily, the number one for both was actually fundraising help, which goes back to what I was saying before about this process being put into place, actually raising, dollars for our companies. But then there were other things where that they were a little bit mismatched, looking at what they're telling us, just like you would tell a startup founder, listen to your customer. Platform people need to listen to our customer, which is portfolio companies.
That's really helpful. And I think about growth stage investors. Typically, they have a smaller portfolio of active companies. And I have seen the platform teams or operator teams start to take hold at some of these growth equity funds. So, I mean, are there any differences between a platform team and an early stage and growth equity fund?
It's a whole different ballgame. As soon as you're looking at companies that are taking on that much money, they are more sophisticated companies. They're bigger. They have bigger teams themselves. They don't need the startup help that early stage startups need, like the cash management thing. That's not really something that a growth stage fund would be asking for help with. They would probably have a lot of expertise in-house to take that on. That's typically where you start to see hyper specialization, platform type roles that are super business savvy in particular either sectors. They understand an industry super well and are very networked and connected and are probably have operator experience in that world, or in the actual skill set, can go very deep, work in the weeds with a model or something, and not have to juggle all the different balls that an early stage platform person has to juggle.
One other difference also is on the content side. I've just seen more content at early stage investment funds. You've done a really good job of building ffVC's name. Granted, they've been around for your seventh or eighth fund now, but I mean, with the Enterprise Summit, with the newsletter, hosting different events in the city. So in your opinion, how important is brand building in VC?
Super important. VC brands have become consumer brands almost, the way that they're designed and they resonate with people. Founders have an aspirational connection to early stage VCs. Also, they're very personality driven. You have these partners that become the face of a VC versus these growth stage funds and private equity. They become more institutional. And so you have more at stake. There's more money there. And then you also have more red tape. There's just more oversight on all the communications, and they want to be really careful about what they're putting out there, and are they approving something that could be considered financial advice, which is a big no-no regardless of whether you're big or small. You have to be really careful about that stuff. So it's almost a little bit Wild West at the early stage, and you see these brands publishing content daily, these blogs. And with the newsletter, I actually I used to send a draft to John every time I was about to hit go and publish the GAN. And he actually told me to stop because it was too much and he didn't have any notes for me. So it was so shocking to me. I was like, oh, wow. Even though I'm working at a financial institution for the first time in my career, there's still a lot of ownership that I'm given, with the newsletter being just one example of it. And I write about my week in that newsletter, and I get kind of personal sometimes. And it will not read at all like something that a later stage or growth stage VC will be putting out.
Content is something everyone's trying to figure out. We're trying to figure it out with the podcast, trying to figure out as an investor. There's this balance, quantity over quality, short form, long form. Are there any pieces of content that you've made internally or that you've seen externally that have just been the most helpful or have received the best responses?
What's interesting is a lot of time it's the most simple content. There's almost a perception that the audience is a little bit more sophisticated than they are. At the end of the day, it's a lot of founders who are trying to raise money. They want to know things like how to put together like an incredible pitch in 10 slides, or do you need AI as part of your product moat? These things that are almost when you're in it, for us, we are like, oh, like AI, ChatGPT, people are talking about this stuff all the time. But if you can take something that seems sort of complicated and make it simple, don't go too crazy on the length, keep it short, keep it simple, stupid. People like simplicity. And the articles that seem repetitive, how to fundraise, like how to get your first corporate customer, that's just, it does well. It gets the clicks.
It's just short form content. Our brains can't handle these longer form stints anymore. So everyone goes to TikTok.
I know, like if something's too complicated, maybe you get halfway through. It's best to cut it into two or something.
People are busy. On that note, some fairly notable VCs and growth stage investment firms purposely stay away from content creation, and they stay away from the social media light, and they're very much in the dark. That's a really interesting strategy. And obviously some prioritize it to the point where every investor has their own Substack or podcast or whatever it may be. There's a large spectrum when it comes to content creation. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why one strategy might be better than the other.
Sometimes we forget that VCs are really small, especially at the early stage, and there aren't really a lot of people in place to keep these machines running. Laura, you're on TikTok. I've seen your amazing videos pop up. It does take rhythm and consistency and putting your face out there. If you don't have someone that's like owning that process, doing it well, you really shouldn't do it at all. We thought about like, should we have an ffVC podcast? And I shot it down immediately because I was like, that's basically like starting an entire business. It's a lot of work. You guys put a lot of work into this. It's not really a casual thing you just do to hopefully get more traffic to the website. Our Gives Ask newsletter has become the tentpole content piece that we as ffVC put out there, and it reaches so many people and is useful to them. We don't feel a ton of pressure to be keeping up a Medium blog or a Substack or something, because it's just not going to be high quality. And so with a lot of funds, you need to think about, what do we actually want to say? And like you said, sometimes it's not saying anything, and that's a statement, because maybe you're just focused on the work. We're too busy scouting, talking to companies or portfolio companies, doing diligence. We were looking at different VC websites, and one was just a Notion page. And there was another one that was just a white website with black text. You don't even have the portfolio companies, and I think it just has a blog, and that's it. These are statements that funds are making. Not saying something is just as much a statement as saying something. So it's just about doing one thing well and being very like clean. because you don't want a lot of PR pollution out there in the world that people are going to stumble upon and be like, why is there one article on this Medium page? That's so weird. It's just messy.
And I've heard a lot of people say, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. It is important to be able to have a succinct, well thought out piece that does kind of explain who you are. But I totally agree with the thought that you don't want to just produce content for the sake of producing content. It's a great transition into getting your thoughts just in general of how venture capital firms are able to differentiate and win deals in what has now become a very competitive venture landscape, even in New York, let alone including the San Francisco-based VCs.
When I was applying for jobs in platform, one of the people that interviewed me said, what we want to see from you is a shout out on a board call. And I was like, whoa, I hadn't even thought, I was so new to platform. I was like, oh, that is the mark of good work. If you're helping a company to the point where they're mentioning a platform person's name on a board meeting with 10 different VCs with their own huge teams, the best referral that a founder can get is from another founder who says, ffVC backed me at the seed stage. We're now Series C or something, and we're still super close. They're super engaged. They're on my board. We had a company, Outlet, that just went public through a SPAC last year, and the CEO said, John invested in us when we were just a circuit board with wood and fabric, and now this is an FDA approved sock that babies have when they're born, and it tracks their oxygen levels, and it's incredible. The fact that John was there to see the opportunity back when it was literally nothing. It was a science project, and now it's a public company with FDA approval. So that's really what we want. We want founders beyond even the NPS scores to just say, hey, you're building a cool business. I think that you need a great partner, and ffVC has been an incredible partner to me. And that's a deal that we want. That's the best referral we can get.
Something that I read recently was that it was quite surprising just because of the value add that platform and even ability to win deals that we just touched on the team has, is that Sequoia cut 1/3 of the talent team. And I definitely think it's just due to the macroeconomic trends and whatnot, and a bit of a VC downturn that we experienced over the last year. Do you expect this potentially kind of cascade into other funds as well? Or do you think this was more of a one-off?
This made a lot of waves in the platform community. That article was just horrendous, just made a lot of big statements out of very little research. But the bigger picture was VCs used to feel they can't downsize, and we don't follow the same revenue trends that a normal company would. We make our money through our LPs. It's a whole different structure. That was more like a signal that we can downsize, and Sequoia is basically signaling that that's okay. But on the platform side, talent is one piece of the pie, and most of my colleagues and probably people that you might have on the show and platform are not necessarily from one specialty, being talent. I don't think it's going to trickle down, because I think it would be, especially for teams that have only a few platform leaders like me, that would be a very big chunk of the work that goes out. And a lot of us are doing the work of multiple people. This is a big divisive topic. On a personal level, there's already a bit of a tension between the investment side and the platform side, and we didn't really need any more fuel to that fire, because we all work together for the same goal, which is giving returns back to our LPs. But I hope that article quietly goes away.
VCs can overhire just like our companies can overhire. You get excited and you think you need all these people because you have all these immediate needs. But at the same time, you have someone like you who can manage 90 portfolio companies and who can wear multiple hats. That's something that we almost have to take our own advice that we give our portfolio companies.
That's really well said. Totally. A lot of us are overworked, and we do need more support. Don't want to make that normal, but you don't need, especially like we were saying, the growth stage funds might need a specialist for different things, because you have huge companies that you put millions and millions of dollars into being challenged with very specific things, and you have experts on hand to address it. But sometimes I'm like, those funds are so problematic. Sequoia and Andreessen, we forget that they had crypto funds. They don't want to be reminded about. You chase these trends and the hype. We try to avoid that.
For people looking to get to move into platform role at a VC and specifically at a smaller team where it's kind of you're wearing multiple hats rather than being a specialist, what is the typical background or profile that you look for in those types of hires?
It's an amazing role for someone who was a founder like me or was an early employee at a startup who understands that balance between strategy and execution, who can be really smart about solving big problems and then actually rolls up their sleeves and gets it done. I've been speaking to a lot of really smart people who are coming out of partnerships roles at SVB, for example, moving on to want to coming over to the VC side, people who come from media like me or marketing backgrounds. So I think it's kind of one of these roles where it really benefits a hiring manager from a VC to go outside of venture capital to actually hire a platform person. I'm grateful because it did bring me into this space and I'm glad I found out about it. I just think it's something that not that many people know what platform is. And unless your network really touches platform, you won't figure it out. Or hopefully this podcast will reach people and educate them about all the great things that you can work on without necessarily being an investor. It's not the only way to play a role among portfolio companies and helping startups grow.
Very well said. And we have two questions for you to wrap up. The first is, what motivates you to work hard?
I just love doing things, pushing things out into the world and seeing people experience it. I just get a high off of those moments where you build, you build, you build, and then you just push it out and the world hopefully benefits from the hard work. I'm like a problem solver, so I love just seeing things that I can do to help people.
A true connector. And then what's a piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
I would advise my younger self to try even more things. I definitely was someone that tried a lot of things, but I grew up in this creative household, so I wish I knew about venture capital earlier on. And there was definitely a community in tech and finance at Georgetown. I just didn't really explore it. So I would have urged myself to talk to people who did very different things and see where there may have been some overlaps I didn't realize at the time.
This has been a really insightful episode on just platform in general and specifically your role, Charlotte. And Laura and I are very appreciative of you taking time to join us. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun to think about these things, and you asked great questions.